Okay, this video is about iron and cancer. So this is part 8 of the iron overload lecture series. Cancer needs iron to grow. So if you lower your body's serum ferritin, an indicator of your total body iron, you've got the potential chance to restrict iron away from the cancer and decrease its ability to grow. Cancer dedifferentiates and becomes somewhat like an anaerobic bacteria. It just wants to grow and it needs iron to grow. So lowering iron, that's been shown to lower the risk of liver cancer. Baruch Bloomberg here won a Nobel Prize showing that increased body iron, increased liver cancer, and there's other related papers on that subject. We talked about how bacteria need iron to grow. An egg shell is permeable to bacteria. They'll get into the egg white, but they can never keep growing and make it to the yolk because the lack of iron in the yolk, it's totally deficient of iron, prevents the bacteria from being able to replicate and grow their way to the yolk. And it's just like a human. We can't walk a long distance in the desert because there's no water. So anyways, when we have bacteria in our blood, our body will sequester iron to prevent the bacteria from being able to grow. And you can do the same thing for cancer because it's very much like a anaerobic bacteria, for example. These are the 3 phases of cancer: initiation, promotion, and invasion or metastases. So there's 2 major theories of cancer causation. The first one is the mutation theory or somatic mutation theory, SMT, and that's the one all the textbooks are based on, and I think it's almost completely wrong. Okay, just so you know, hypoxia theory or the metabolic theory of cancer makes a lot more sense. And it might be times when they're both playing a role, but when you start studying the metabolic theory, everything will make a ton more sense and you'll have a very good idea of things you can do to help yourself. Okay, things that cause tumor promotion. So this could be just like damaging the DNA, so now the cell's vulnerable to replicating out of control. But it takes a lot of things to happen to get a cell to replicate out of control. Once you're in this phase of tumor growth, tumor promotion, animal protein is a major tumor promoter, but there's a lot of other things that will promote a tumor. Estrogenic chemicals, estrogen itself, iron is a big one. So by restricting iron, we can slow down a tumor growth potentially. By restricting estrogen and estrogen-sensitive tumors, you can slow down the growth, like most breast cancer, most prostate cancer. Things that increase insulin tend to speed up the growth of a tumor. There's a whole bunch of things that will increase insulin resistance, and that'll come from like a high-fat diet, especially saturated fat, but also excessive dietary sodium, a lack of plant food, so you got a lack of potassium, a lack of magnesium. Things that increase insulin like growth factor, which relates pretty much to this high-fat stuff, but also things that increase mTOR. Iron increases mTOR. That's another reason to restrict it. The amino acid composition in animal protein, especially the leucine, will increase mTOR. mTOR is like a building contractor getting ready to build a building. It's a nutrient sensing pathway. And the builder doesn't build a building until they've got all the materials ready to go. And typically the rate limiting step is going to be leucine. So by relative depletion of leucine, you make it harder for mTOR to ever get started to activate cell growth. And again, excessive iron, excessive fat can also activate mTOR. And you can restrict all those things. That's what you want to do. It's kind of like a scorched earth policy to prevent the cancer from growing. You want to avoid immune suppression because that also gives the cancer cells increased chance to grow. You want to avoid continued hypoxia because that can keep the cycle going of growth and facilitate the growth of metastases. Anything that will promote an acidotic hypoxic milieu, meaning that the space around the cancer to be hypoxic, deficient in oxygen, or to be acidic. Those things favor cancer growth over the neighboring cells. So, eating a plant-based diet is relatively alkaline, all your fruits and vegetables, okay? The animal protein has more sulfur-containing amino acids, and their degradation includes some being converted to sulfuric acid, causing acidosis. Excessive dietary sodium, the excessive sodium chloride. The chloride will displace bicarbonate from the blood and lead to a relative metabolic acidosis, which contributes to acidotic milieu around a tumor. Excessive dietary sodium in and of itself also causes more protons to be pumped into the extracellular matrix. Excessive psychological stress is bad because that causes platelet activation. It's prothrombotic. It's also hyperlipidemic. It's also immunosuppressant because of all the cortisol. So all these things make sense, especially looked at from the context of the metabolic theory. You can easily come up with a whole bunch of things to do that are likely to increase the chances of a cancer patient to live longer. This was just from Tom Seyfried's book. This guy did some brilliant work on cancer as a metabolic disease. So I got to give him credit. He did great work. He's got very good lectures on this subject. I think he screwed up though because he recommends ketogenic diet. I think that's actually ignorant. And you'll see that a lot of scientists are brilliant in their own niche, but you get them into nutrition where they don't know what's going on and they'll often say really stupid stuff. So the point of this experiment here was that a normal cell divides normally and produces normal progeny. A cancer cell produces cancer progeny, immortal cells. But if you take a cell where you've got cancer nucleus, so if you took this nucleus out and put it over here, just the DNA, this cell will grow normally. The point is that the cancer growth is not because of the DNA in the nucleus. It is because of what's happening in the cytoplasm and the mitochondria. And if you did the same experiment, now this time you take the mitochondria and the cytoplasm from a cancer cell and you put it in a new hybrid cell that has normal DNA, it'll grow like a cancer cell because of the cytoplasm and the mitochondria. And this again is consistent with the metabolic theory of cancer. The Genome Atlas project also showed that the somatic mutation theory didn't make sense. You couldn't find a consistent, stepwise, predictable pattern of mutations typically for cancers. Okay, so the point of this slide is just there's a whole bunch of mitochondrial toxins, things that decrease mitochondrial function. And it's thought that an initiating event in cancer causation is hypoxia, which prevents the mitochondria from function. And the point of the slide is that no matter what you do, you're going to be exposed to some of these things. So you might as well control everything you can control. But also look, excessive dietary iron is damaging to the inner mitochondrial membrane electron transport system of the mitochondria for energy production. Okay, cells need this to grow normally. F- does it. HNE, hydroxynonenal, from eating too much cooking oils, omega-6 fats. Cadmium, lead, atrazine from the non-organic foods like corn, the corn sweeteners and whatnot. Okay. This is the big mutation that occurs in cancer. Well, let's not say mutation. This is the giant metabolic change that happens. Instead of using like hexokinase 1, glucokinase, you're going to go to hexokinase 2. And this enzyme is unique. It's the first step in glycolysis. It's unique in that it attaches to the mitochondria and it locks in with something called VDAC, which is a voltage-dependent anion channel. And it's right here to suck up any ATPs coming off the residual mitochondrial function that's still present. There's not as much as a normal cell, but there's still some. And this is a key change that helps make cancer cells immortal. So anyways, that's the big one. We're not going to get into that right now. I've talked about that in other lectures, but just to be aware of it. The other point I want to make is cancer can produce energy. It doesn't just need to do it from glucose. It could do it from glutamine. It could run Krebs cycle backwards and get everything it needs from glutamine. That's why you can't win the game by just trying to avoid glucose. That's not going to work. Glutamine will just come in the back door. It's like the most abundant amino acid. And that's another reason why I don't think the ketogenic diet is a good idea for treating cancer patients. Okay, a normal cell, its typical job is it's basically like a laborer. It's going to work long hours all day long. It needs to make tons of energy, ATP. Cancer cell is not like that. Cancer cell just wants to grow. It doesn't want to do any work. It's like a parasite, okay? Cancer just wants to grow. What that means is it has to do lots of synthesis. It has to synthesize a lot of proteins, nucleic acids, and other things. Because in order to replicate, a cell has to double itself. It has to double all of its components, its membranes, its proteins, its nucleic acids. Typical human cell has got 3.3 billion, that's B as in billion, base pairs for its DNA. So that's a lot of nucleic acids it has to make. Oops. This is a good slide because it shows that. So here's an anaerobic bacteria, an anaerobic metabolism. Here's a normal cell, aerobic metabolism with lots of ATP made in the mitochondria. And here's a cancer cell. The most important thing for our talk today is that there's marked upregulation over 100 times more transferrin receptors for iron on the plasma membrane. So it becomes hypersensitive. And I've also talked about this before. Most people, the way they think about most things is they use like their social brain. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, everything in moderation. That kind of thinking is bad for health. It does not work. You want to think biblical. Thou shalt not eat meat. Thou shalt not eat oil. Thou shalt lower thy iron levels. Because people who think like that, and by the way, all the champion athletes I know think like that. This intense focused attitude of restricting iron, restricting the animal protein amino acids, that will make life tough for these cancer cells because they have a unique growth profile. They need tons of iron. They need a lot of fat. they need that leucine, okay? So you can restrict that stuff. That's what I would do if I had cancer. Okay, we talked about the hypoxia theories of cancer, like the Warburg theory, the Nathan Pritikin hypoxia theories. You know, I call it my own version of a total body ischemia. So the point is, let's say you have something in the lungs like asbestos, a foreign body. The lung will wall it off with fibrosis. With that fibrosis, some normal cells of the lung get trapped inside there. Let's say some pleural lining cells. And these pleural lining cells are hypoxic. They can undergo a Warburg effect and become cancerous. And that will be a surprisingly common mechanism. Okay, a little bit more on cancer causation. Papua New Guinea, they ate 93% of their calories from sweet potatoes, smoked a ton. Japanese ate lots of rice and vegetables. They also had a lot of salt. They smoked a ton. But guess what? The Americans, for example, had over 6 times more lung cancer than Papua New Guinea. And it's thought the reason was the high amounts of animal protein, the high amounts of fat and sat fat, and also the high amounts of iron from eating all that animal protein. That's why they got more than 6 times as much cancer as Papua New Guinea. I don't know the exact ratio of Americans' cancer to Japanese, but the Americans had a lot more than the Japanese. I think it was more in the ballpark of like 2.5 times or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. But the point is, why? The Japanese were smoking more than the Americans. And I think it's because the alkalinity, the antioxidants, and the avoidance of animal protein. So they're getting a lot of the good stuff from their vegetables, and then they're avoiding the bad stuff by not eating the meat. Okay, that's some interesting stuff. Okay, here's the situation in the liver. Fatty liver is so common it's not even funny. The old joke amongst radiologists is if a requisition comes in, as it routinely does, patient with elevated LFTs. LFT means liver function tests, okay? You don't even need to look at the films. The patient will always have a fatty liver, okay? And if you look at kidney ultrasounds where they rule out kidney stones, and even for most other reasons with the kidney, most of the patients will have fatty livers. Fatty liver is basically like prediabetes, diabetes of the liver. It means that the liver is not so skilled at sensing blood glucose level and thus not so skilled at maintaining a normal blood glucose level in the fasting phase. So this fatty liver proceeds over time to more fibrotic liver, eventually to cirrhosis. Well, as that fibrotic scarring due to end-stage inflammation is happening in the liver, bits of liver tissue get walled off and they become partially deficient in oxygen delivery. They become hypoxic. That's the Warburg effect. So you see how inflammation, infection, they can both cause cancer because of the scarring and fibrosis, scar tissue around the walled off infection or inflammatory foreign body, leading to some normal cells being trapped in that milieu of inflammation, scarring, and fibrosis and becoming hypoxic and potentially becoming cancerous. So, and you throw more iron on there and you'll dramatically increase the risk of cancer, let's say in the liver, for example. Okay. Jim Moon, who wrote the book Cancer is the Most Toxic Metal, he felt that cancer was especially unique and bad in that it can increase cancer risk in all 3 major phases of cancer: the initiation phase, the promotion phase of cancer, and the metastatic spread phase. It can increase reactive oxygens, damaging DNA early in the game. It's needed by cancer to grow in the promotion, phase 2 of cancer, and in phase 3. The cancer cells will have lots of extratransferrin receptors on their plasma membrane, upregulated over 100-fold, and they have a way to suck up more iron, and this helps the metastatic cells to grow as well. So anyways, cancer is pretty important iron is pretty important for cancer growth. And even when it's not inside our body, when it's just in our colon, it'll cause redox cycling that'll increase the risk of injury to the colon lining cells, increase the risk of cancer. You feed animals more iron, they get increased risk of cancer. Iron activates mtor. So here's a paper on iron activating mtor. And if you chelate the iron, you can lower it. But we've talked about how to lower iron in the body with blood donation, etc., and changing one's diet. Cancer needs iron. This is just some of the reactions. We talk about Fe for Fenton reaction, Fe for iron, ferrous. It also relates into the Haber-Washel reaction and lipid peroxidation mechanism. So I've gone through all that in my oxidative stress levels. I'm just reminding you that iron can do all kinds of bad things when it gets present in excessive amounts due to ferrous redox cycling between Fe2 plus and Fe3 plus. This is just showing a normal cell and a cancer cell. A cancer cell is going to burn through tons more iron. And so that's why restricting iron favors normal cells over cancer cells, because when the cancer cell is deficient, it's going to have a much harder time growing. In this paper, the hepatitis C patients who had their iron levels lowered with phlebotomy had 4.5 times lower risk of getting liver cancer. Here's another study where you get decreased cancer risk when you reduced iron. The patients who kept their ferritin, an average of 71, they didn't have cancer problems, whereas the ones who were over 127 had a lot more cancer in their serum ferritin. So that serum ferritin is a useful guide for deciding how far you want to lower your iron levels in your body. More studies here. Here's a guy, Bloomberg, who won the Nobel Prize for showing that increased iron increases cancer growth in the liver. Weinberg also wrote a lot. He wrote an entire book about iron overload being associated with increased infection and cancer. So tons has been written on this, but it just doesn't get talked to doctors. That's why they don't know it. But I can assure you, you'll find tons of papers on this if you start looking into the subject. Cancer is like an aerobic bacteria. When there's an infection, an acute inflammatory phase, the liver releases acute phase reactants, these acute phase proteins, to help protect the body from the acute event. And a lot of them are specifically designed to sequester iron or reduce the body's absorption of iron. So it's going to release hepcidin. We talked about that. Shuts the ferroportin door on iron absorption from the gut. Ferro means iron, portin means door, and this is like a duodenocite, the duodenum level cells. Enterocyte is from enteric tract, is the gut. So you're going to shut down iron absorption, increase ferritin to store more in the body. Then you'll have these iron-binding proteins like lactoferrin to try to suck up any iron and keep it away from the bacteria. And you're also keeping it away from cancer. Basically, what you want in your body is to be in a maintenance phase if you've got cancer. Like, this is what I would focus on if I had cancer. I would exercise like crazy to get the lymphatic fluid flowing, because the lymphatic fluid flowing is pumped by the muscle contractions, and that sends the WBCs around the body to surveil and remove metastatic cancer cells. You also activate a pathway called the AMP pathway, and that's like for adenosine monophosphate instead of ATP, high energy adenosine triphosphate. And this is the rest phase. The body rebuilds its stores of energy. So you want to be in that phase because it shuts off mTOR. So post-exercise tiredness phase is actually good for a cancer patient because it shuts off mTOR. Complex carbohydrates, that's the best way to feed the human body, and fruits, vegetables, and starches. Those are really only 3 things you need to eat. Okay, staying thin, avoiding all the problems with obesity-related adipose tissue release of things you don't want, inflammatory cytokines and whatnot, not to mention the lipids. Okay, getting your sleep will increase is associated with higher melatonin. All that's the body rests and rebuilds itself. Love, the oxytocin hormone, purpose, religion, gratitude, all those things optimize your hormonal profile. Comedy, laughter, time with loved ones and friends. And these things make your body better able to protect itself from cancer. And then you want to avoid all this other stuff. Excessive fat, excessive iron, obesity, stress, insomnia. All those things tend to increase cell growth. So these are a lot of things one can do to slow down cancer. You slow it down 50%, you live twice as long. Remember, we talked about a target goal of ferritin is, in the ballpark of 25 to 80. So you keep it down in that range. I would probably try to keep mine between about 25 to 60 if I had cancer, as a way to iron restrict. And these are all the other things we can do. We talked about this in other lectures to help slow down the growth of cancer. Okay, so that's it for the lecture, Iron Overload Part 8 as it relates to cancer.